So tonight we're here with Ethan Kross. Ethan Kross is a PhD. He's one of the world's leading experts on controlling the conscious mind, an award-winning professor at the University of Michigan and the Ross School of Business. He's the director of the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. He has participated in policy discussion at the White House and has been interviewed on CBS Evening News, Good Morning America, Anderson Cooper Full Circle, and NPR's Morning Edition. His pioneering research has been featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the New England Journal of Medicine, and Science. He completed his BA at the University of Pennsylvania and his PhD at Columbia. That's quite the bio there, Ethan.
Thank you, Samantha. Generous introduction. It's just great to be here, and it never gets old talking to a hometown crowd, and so just delighted to get into the book with you.
Absolutely. So why don't I have you kick it off with a quick synopsis of the book, and maybe you can jump in and just tell us why you decided to write Chatter.
Sure. So what Chatter talks about is, number one, what does it even mean to have a voice in our head? This is something that is a universal, and it plays an outsized role in our life. There's a statistic I love to tell people that we spend between 1/2 and 1/3 of our waking hours not living in the present. So our mind is adrift for a significant portion of time, and we spend a lot of that time lost in verbal thought, which is what the voice in our head is all about. We're talking about our ability to silently use language to reflect on our lives. And that capacity, as I talk about in the book, is kind of a superpower that lets us do many different things. We use our inner voice to keep information active in our heads. Like you go to the grocery store and you walk down the aisle, and if you're like me, you're like, oh, what was I supposed to get? And then you go through the list: milk, cheese, eggs. You do that silently, of course. That's your inner voice. It's part of our memory system, our working memory system. So your inner voice lets you do that. It also lets you do things like simulate and plan for the future. So before I have a big presentation, I'll go for a walk around my neighborhood in Ann Arbor, and I'll go through the talking points about what I'm going to say during that walk silently, beginning to end. I go through the whole presentation. So my inner voice lets me do that. It also lets me control myself. Like when I'm working out and not wanting to be working out, and I start, all right, come on, man, just a little bit more. And sometimes I even, in my mind, if I'm with in an exercise class and they're having me do very painful things, I'll have very ugly thoughts sometimes directed towards the people telling me to do that. That's my inner voice too, right? So it's helping me control myself. And then finally, our inner voice, and I think this is one of the most magical qualities of it, not in a supernatural sense, but really an awe-inspiring sense. Our inner voice helps us create stories that give shape to our sense of who we are. So bad things happen, we experience adversity, we usually stop, try to make sense of those experiences. Why was I rejected? Why were those people mean to me? Why did this happen? And when we ask ourselves those questions, we start trying to come up with these explanations. And we use our inner voice to come up with those explanations, those stories that are pivotal to our sense of our identity. So our inner voice helps us do all those things, but it also gets us into deep, deep trouble, like when we start worrying and ruminating and getting stuck in negative thought loops. Oh my God, what if this? Why did I say that? When we start spinning, that's what I call chatter. And the puzzle that has really intrigued me throughout my career has been, why is it that we have this amazing tool at our possession, our inner voice, serves us well a lot of the time, except when it doesn't, which is also a lot of the time. And so when we find ourselves worrying and ruminating and experiencing what I call chatter, what are the science-based tools that exist for regaining control of our inner voice, for making it work for us rather than against us? And so I've spent the past 20 years working in the lab and out in the field trying to identify what those tools are. There are a boatload of them, things you could do on your own, ways of harnessing your relationships with other people, ways of interacting with your physical spaces, your environments that can help us from the outside in. And Chatter, the book, really tells the story of about how those tools were discovered. It talks about how they play out in different people's lives. Really, I think interesting people, ranging from a former student I had who was an undercover spy to athletes and lots of other colorful characters. And so it tells a story about what those tools are, how they work, to ultimately give folks the possibility of incorporating those tools into their lives. So that's the synopsis. Now, I must confess, it's been a long day, Samantha. I forgot the second part of your question. What was the second part?
Yeah. So what brought you to actually writing this book?
Right. Okay, so that's a great question. There's a tiny story behind that. So I've been here at the University of Michigan for about 13 years. And one class that I've taught for most of the years that I've been here is a class called The Science of Self-Control. It was an undergrad course, and you can think about it as science's greatest hits when it comes to controlling the human mind, controlling your emotions. And it was always a really fun class to teach, and mostly seniors took it. And the last time I taught the course, something interesting happened on the last day of the semester. So the way the course was structured, every week I'd assign readings, students would read them, they'd write response papers, 1 page, and then I would pepper them with questions when they'd come in. We'd have a great discussion. And then on the final day of class, what I would do is I'd flip the switch. So students would come in with questions for me. They were experts, and so this is their opportunity to ask me anything that's on their mind before they leave the course, and in most cases leave college. And the last time I taught this course, a girl named Ariel raised her hand immediately at the beginning of the class and said to me, "Why are we learning about this now?" She didn't actually say it with that tone. It was more like, "Why are we learning about this now?" Like, she was pissed off. And I didn't know what she meant. I had never gotten that question before. And I asked her to elaborate, and she went on to say, we've been learning this whole semester about all of these tools that exist, tools of the mind that we can use to think better, to perform better, to have better relationships, to have better health. Why didn't anyone teach us about these things earlier on in life? Why didn't anyone teach us about this stuff in elementary school or middle school or high school? Now we're seniors. We're leaving. It's too late. And so my first reaction was to say, fear not. Ariel was her name. Like, you will have opportunities to experience and try to control worry and rumination and anger in your 20s and beyond. Like, you're not a lost cause in that regard. But then I did something that was somewhat cowardly, at least in my mind. I deflected the question to the class because I didn't have a good answer. So instead of answering, I said, well, it's a great question. What does everyone else think here? Why do you think we're learning about it now? And that got the wheels churning and got me to think about how can we take what we know about these issues and really share them with folks outside of academia. And so the book was one way of doing that, I hope.
I think it's really interesting point to bring up, that you're given all these tools when you're older, but you're right, in your 20s, 30s, you still got room to grow and to use those tools. So I think that was a good answer. So a lot of us are familiar with this idea of this voice in our head. But what does that term exactly refer to? And what does it mean to actually have an inner voice? And is that the same thing as chatter, or is that something a little bit different?
Well, so the inner voice in technical terms refers to our ability to silently use language to reflect on our lives. And as I mentioned earlier, I think of it as a kind of Swiss Army knife of the human mind that lets us do many different things: memory, planning, controlling ourselves, creating stories. Chatter refers to the dark side of our inner voice. So chatter is what happens when we experience something in the world that's usually something negative, something we can't really make sense of. And we turn our attention inward to try to start working through that problem, to try to problem solve. But we don't come up with a clear solution, and instead we start spinning. The visual image for chatter is of a gerbil on an exercise wheel. You're just running, you're not getting anywhere. You're stuck in a negative thought loop. That's so chatter is the negative manifestation of the inner voice. And it's, I think, one of the big problems we face as a society. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here. I'm not exaggerating. I've reviewed this literature, and the data documenting the negative effects of chatter are really striking. So let me just explain what I mean by that. Chatter undermines us in three domains of life that I would argue really make life worth living. It undermines our ability to think and perform. So if anyone here has ever tried to read a few pages in a book while they're worried or ruminating about something, you read those 4 or 5 pages or chapter, you are sure, under oath, you would swear to a judge that you have read the words, they've passed your visual stream. But if I were to ask you, hey, what'd you read? You wouldn't be able to tell me anything that you've actually read. And the reason for that is, I mean, Samantha, can you back me up on this? Has this happened to you? Fair? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Very common. I've yet to talk with thousands of people to someone who has not had that experience at times. The reason for that is your attention is somewhere else, right? So we only have so much attention we can focus on things at any given moment in time. If your attention is somewhere else on your chatter, it's not on the things you're trying to do, which can be really difficult for performing well at work or in school. We also know that chatter can undermine us in those contexts by leading us to overthink things. It can lead to something called paralysis by analysis. And here the idea is, look, we've got many complicated behaviors that we often execute without thinking. Take what I'm doing right now, a version of public speaking. I've been speaking in the public or publicly, so I'm messing it up already, for like decades. And I've learned to do lots of different things, to use my hands, to vary my vocal tone, to go, to move a little bit back and forth. If I'm on a stage, I'm pacing the stage, I'm smiling and nodding. Lots of little things have been strung together into one performance that hopefully comes across as seamless. When you're experiencing chatter, we tend to zoom in on the problem. So if I'm really concerned about my public speaking, what I'll start doing is I'll start thinking, am I using my hands too much? Am I varying my vocal tone? And once you start focusing on those individual elements, the whole thing unravels. We saw this happen to a spectacular degree this summer with Simone Biles during the Olympics. She experienced what she called the twisties, which is another name for chatter. And it was so bad that it led her to withdraw from the Olympics. So that gives you a sense of the stakes. World Health Organization recently put a price tag on this, $1 trillion for the US global economy alone. That's the cost in terms of lost productivity that we see linked to anxiety and depression, which are mood disorders linked very strongly with chatter. So chatter makes it hard to think and perform. It also creates friction in our social relationships, because one of the things that happens when we experience chatter is we're often intensely motivated to share it with others. So we find other people to talk to, but what happens is we start talking and then we keep talking over and over and over again. And that can, unfortunately, this is really, I think, sad. Right? This is a sad circumstance. It can have the effect of pushing away people who really care about us, because there's only so much that they can listen to. So we feel, so they get pushed away, create strain in our relationships. We then detect that strain and we feel lonely and rejected as a result. So that's how it could impact relationships. And then finally, we know that chatter's effects, they're not just subjective. They can also impact us physiologically. And the way this works is all of us here have the capacity to experience stress. Unlike what many of you have probably heard, you probably heard that stress kills. Not true. That is a gross exaggeration. The ability to have a stress response is really, it's a marvel of evolution, right? You want to be able to, you see a threat in the environment, the ability to quickly approach or avoid it, very beneficial. What makes stress toxic is when our stress response goes up and then remains chronically activated over time. That exerts a wear and tear on the body that predicts things like cardiovascular disease, problems of inflammation, even certain forms of cancer. And that is precisely what chatter does, because we experience something negative, but we don't leave it behind. We keep replaying it over and over and over again in our minds. So work, thinking and performance, relationships and health, chatter impacts all three. That's why I think it's such a huge issue, and why I've devoted so much energy to trying to figure out what people can do about it.
So you talk about relationships. So I actually had a conversation today with a coworker of mine, and we were talking about the mental load. Would you consider chatter part of that, or?
Yeah, the mental, well, so let me break down mental load, how I think about it. So we have I'm totally simplifying here for the record, but the front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, this is the part that makes human beings really unique, and it allows us to think flexibly about what we're about, to play with information, to plan for the future and all that kind of stuff. Are the resources we have to engage that part of the brain are limited. There's only so much you can do at any given moment in time, right? And so what chatter does is it consumes those resources. So it takes over all of those what we call executive resources, leaving nothing over to do anything else. So that's how chatter plays into the whole mental load scenario. Does that get at your
Yeah.
question?
Yeah, absolutely. The conversation was about in relationships, how we carry each other's mental load and our schedules and everything, and then the voices that are telling us that we're not enough and that we aren't doing it right, we're not doing it correctly. I'm a parent, and I know that that voice constantly is affecting me as a parent. And also trying to manage the schedules and all of the things. What are some tools? I know in the book you talk about the tools. Do you mind sharing a few of them?
No,
That you
I'd be more than happy to share. And you know, before I do, let me say one thing about the tools, because so first, like, the good news is there's lots of tools, lots of science-based tools. I'm a scientist. Everything I talk about in the book is science-based. Lots of things you could do to manage chatter. So that's really good. But when I usually tell people about the negative side of the inner voice, when I describe those pain points associated with chatter, the question I usually get is, so how can you help me silence that inner voice? Just shut it up, turn it off. And what I usually tell people is, actually, that's not what you want to do. And I want to point this out in the beginning, because this is like a way of thinking about our inner voice. Given all the amazing things your inner voice does for you, the last thing you would want to do is get rid of it, because then you'd have a lot of trouble planning and remembering and controlling yourself. You want to figure out how to harness it instead. And by that, I mean reducing the chatter to free it up so that your inner voice can do all the other wonderful things. There's a fantastic story that I think illustrates this distinction between silencing versus harnessing. It's a story of a woman named Jill Bolt Taylor, who was a Harvard neuroanatomist, really working at the top of her game. And like many people who are excelling, like, that doesn't mean you're not with chatter. It was like chatter all the time, the worries, the ruminations. And so she would often think, my God, can I just silence this voice? She actually got her wish. She got her wish in the form of a stroke that she experienced while she was exercising one morning on her treadmill. And the stroke was localized in her the left part of her brain, and it targeted language centers of the brain. So parts of the brain that are responsible for producing speech. So she lost her ability to talk to other people, but also she lost her ability to talk to herself. And initially, she described this experience as strangely euphoric, because once the words went away, so did all of her worries and ruminations. All the chatter went away. But as the hours and days went on, what she realized is she was not doing very well, because she was having trouble thinking. She couldn't remember things. She couldn't weave together experiences from the past and future to understand what was happening to her. She couldn't control herself. not having an inner voice for her was actually a huge liability. And so I think it's a great anecdote to illustrate the fact that what our goal should be is not to silence this inner voice. It is to figure out how to harness it, how to wield it more effectively. So that's a little preamble just to set up the tools. You asked me what tools there are. I talk about 27 in the book. The book is, by the way, not a how-to guide per se. It really is a story of the science surrounding how all of these tools fit together in our emotional lives. The way I organize the tools is in 3 buckets. There are things you could do on your own, ways of harnessing your relationships with other people, and then ways of interacting with your environments, all of which can function to help us harness that inner voice. In terms of things you could do on your own, the first thing to keep in mind is that when we experience chatter, what ends up happening is that chatter zooms us in on our problems. We think in a very narrow, almost tunnel vision like way about what's bothering us. And what we've learned over the years is one natural antidote to that chatter is to zoom out, to take a step back and try to think about the broader perspective. Try to think about your experience from a more objective standpoint that helps you see that bigger picture. And there are lots and lots of ways of doing that. One of my favorite tools is something that we call distanced self-talk. And what it involves is trying to coach yourself through a problem using your own name and the second person pronoun you, silently, by the way, not out loud. So for example, if I'm really struggling with anxiety about something, all right, Ethan, how are you going to manage a situation? Here's what you need to do. One of the things we know from lots and lots of research is that we are much, much better at giving advice to other people than taking our own advice. There's a famous saying, do as I say, not as I do. In experiments, when we get people experiencing chatter, we often ask them, hey, what are you saying to yourself? What are you thinking? Oftentimes subjects they're actually embarrassed to tell us what thoughts are streaming through their mind, right? Because they're things that they would never actually say out loud. That to me is really powerful. We say things to ourselves that we would never, we don't even want to say them out loud, let alone we would never say them to another human being. The way distant self-talk helps us is if you think about when we use names and the second person pronoun you, those are parts of speech that we virtually exclusively use when we think about and refer to other people. So the links between names and you and other people, super, super tight in the mind. And so essentially what we're doing here is we're almost like duping ourselves. We're automatically switching our perspective. When we use our own name to refer to ourselves, that turns on the neural hardware for thinking about other people. So it switches our perspective and it puts us into that coaching mode. And people start advising themselves like they would their best friend. So that's one tool that's really easy to use. It's as simple as try to coach yourself through the problem using your name. Now, there are a few caveats that I'd like to give you. Number one, in our studies, we have people do this silently, and I would encourage you to try doing this silently. Some people actually enjoy doing this out loud. I personally don't. I don't talk about myself out loud. If you feel compelled to do it, you might want to find a private place to do it. If you really feel compelled to do it and you want to walk down the diag and on the campus, Michigan's campus, or on Main Street in Ann Arbor, I highly, highly recommend you purchase a pair of these like AirPods or something like it, and make sure you have them in your ear so it looks like you're talking to someone else, because we violate social convention when we talk to ourselves out loud. So that's one distancing tool that you can use. Another really quick one, and then I'll throw it back to you, Samantha, to see where you want to take the conversation, is mental time travel. And what this involves is when you're dealing with an acute stressor, a rejection, let's say, or even COVID, what you can do is, rather than bathe in the misery of what we're going through, which is what we often do when we're overcome with chatter, think about how you're going to feel about this issue a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now. What that does, what jumping into that mental time travel machine does for us, is it makes it clear that as awful as what we're going through is, it'll eventually pass, right? And that gives us hope. And hope is a powerful balm for calming an inner voice run amok. So I do this with COVID. I can get down on COVID just like the rest of us. I've got 2 little kids. They're not vaccinated. My life has changed dramatically with it. It's easy to get down in the dumps. And when that happens, I'll first coach myself using my name, and then I'll jump in that mental time travel machine. I'll think about, hey, how am I going to feel about this a year from now? Or even in my case, a month or 2 from now when my kids are finally vaccinated and I don't have to worry about them. That's really going to take the edge off for me. So I'll jump into the time travel machine. I'll go forward in time. You can also go back in time, and that can be helpful too. So I'll often think, well, COVID really is terrible. But what about the Spanish, this 1918 Spanish flu? Like in many ways, that was a lot worse. No Zoom, no Uber Eats takeout, right? Like conditions were no vaccines being developed in record time. I'll go further back in time to the bubonic plague, right? Like that was even worse, much worse. So all of these shifts, simple, easy to do. What they do is they broaden our perspective. They give us some distance from our experience in ways that can be really helpful for reframing what we're going through in ways that reduce that chatter. All right, I'm going to give myself a tea break, throw it back to you. I'm like a wind-up toy. You get me going. I could just keep going.
No, it's perfect. Well, I was going to say, you talk about talking to yourself, calling yourself by name, and a good place to do that, I would imagine, is in the car. And I also find I do a lot of driving. We have 3 stores in Michigan, so there's a lot of driving between there. And I feel like the chatter gets like overwhelming when you're by yourself a lot. And so I can say my name in the car, and I can also time travel when I'm in the car. So that I just wanted to point that out. We do have a couple questions from viewers, so I want to get to those real quick. The first one comes from Amy. Hi, Amy. Why is your appointment at Ross and in the LSA? And how do you use your research in the business setting?
Okay, so the question is, why is the appointment at Ross? That's number one. Well, my primary appointment, so I have a PhD in psychology and neuroscience, and I was in the psychology department 100% up until a few years ago, and I'm still 75% in the psych department, but I'm 25% appointed at Ross. We're getting pretty granular here, but you asked for it. The connection to the business school is there's an intense need to understand how people can regulate their emotions in an organizational context. This is a huge issue. It's relevant to issues concerning what is often described as self-leadership, the ability of leaders to regulate their own emotions effectively in order to do what they need to do, but also to help their colleagues and employees regulate effectively as well. So what's so fascinating to me about the issues we're talking about here is that I think these are universal issues, and they're issues that aren't restricted to one domain of life, like family life or on the sports field. Emotions permeate our experiences in this world, and we spend most of our time each day at work, and so they're highly relevant to that setting. So that's the connection to Ross. Now, the second part of the question was, Samantha, you want to just remind me of that? I don't have it in front of me.
I do. I got to pull it up again. Sorry. How do you use your research in the business setting?
Well, the way we use the findings there is to look at how, first we see, do findings that we see play out, the way these tools operate in non-organizational contexts, do they also generalize and work well there? Do we have to tweak them in any way? And then also looking to see how teaching people to harness their chatter more effectively in those contexts, does that have implications for the bottom line, productivity, well-being, health, not well-being, health, employee well-being and health, and so forth.
Amy says, so more organizational leadership and not marketing.
Correct.
All right.
I
Cheryl,
should
right?
Amy, I should have had you answer that because you would have been much more succinct than I.
Oh, let's see. Oh, Cheryl Rice is asking, hi Ethan, thank you for your work. What does the research say about positive affirmations? Like, I am enough. Should we say, Cheryl, you are enough? And is it okay to refer to oneself with a term of endearment like, sweetie, you got this? Thank you.
So great questions. The positive affirmation literature is actually mixed, and there's some evidence that affirmations can backfire. For example, if you say to yourself, you're enough, but you genuinely don't believe that, that can have a backfiring effect. Like, no, I'm not enough. I totally suck. Look what just like, so that's the dynamic. And so I would not say that affirmations are useful across the board. I think there needs to be some care in terms of how you use those affirmations. There's a caveat here that if you find that an affirmation is working for you, keep doing it. That's a caveat that I provide for all the tools that I talk about. One of the notes that I end the book on is the fact that we have a variety of different tools that are out there, and science has done a really good job profiling how those individual tools work. But what we haven't really succeeded in doing yet, we're just beginning to do now, is figure out which tools work best for different people in different situations. And so I think until we figure that out, there's a challenge for all of us to do some experimenting on ourselves. All of it just to say, if a tool works for you, great, keep using it. And if not, don't. With respect to, with the Cheryl changing that with the affirmation, that's a great idea for an experiment that I would love to run, but we haven't done that study. So I'm not sure what would happen. I don't see there being any additional harm that could come of that. So you might try it, but we don't have a research-based answer to that question just yet. Was there another piece to that question, Samantha?
Nope. Nope. I think you answered it. You're good to go. So another tool that you talk about is write expressively. Talking about journaling about a chatter moment that was powerful. It sounds helpful, but also it sounds intimidating because, like you said, a lot of the times that chatter is stuff that I don't even want to say out loud.
Yeah. Well, and so the tools tools range in terms of their how easy they are to use, how effortful they are. And I would say expressive writing. And what expressive writing entails as a tool is writing about your deepest thoughts and feelings surrounding your chatter for 15 to 20 minutes a day for anywhere from 1 to 3 consecutive days. Research shows that that can be helpful in allowing people to work through their chatter. And it's a kind of distancing tool, because what happens when you start writing about your experiences is you start telling a story, essentially, right? You have a narrative structure that you're imposing on what happened to you. And you're the character of that story. So you're writing about yourself, and you get some mental space that way. And that helps broaden people's perspectives. It can be intimidating. I think I agree with you, Samantha. There have been some occasions in my life where I've been dealt with chatter. And I must say, like, I've been reluctant to write expressly because I don't even want a trace of it out there. But research shows that many people really, really enjoy doing this, and that it helps them. Diary writing, journaling has been with us for ages. And so it is a tool that works for a lot of people.
But that's why you offer up so many different tools, because I'm sure some tools work, as you mentioned, for others that might not work for some, right?
Well, so, when I tried to think about how to put all this together, I thought, what is the best that I can give to other people, to readers, while staying true to the science and not going beyond the data? And the best that I can do is lay the tools out there and show you what they are. So I can give tools, science-based tools for people's toolboxes for managing chatter. What I can't do, now I hope to be able to do this in the future, we're doing research on this now, but I can't do it yet, is say, hey, Samantha, all right, I've spoken to you, I've done a little assessment. These are the six things that you should do on Monday and the 4 things you should do on Tuesday. I don't know of any research that exists that can make a prescription with that level of precision based on where the science is right now. That's not a bad thing. That is just a reality for me. That's exciting. That means there's a lot more for us to learn. but it is where we are right now.
So we have a question from Baltimore Ortega. Hi, Baltimore. In order to deal with our chatter, don't we have to be calm first because our rational brains only work when we are calm?
Well, you need to have the goal. And I would say no. I would say a lot of the tools that exist can help you become calm. And, like distant self-talk, that's a way, I think I've described it in some context as a kind of psychological jujitsu move, right? It's a way of like reorienting things, switching your perspectives really quick to help you calm down. Like another tool that doesn't require you to be calm first. Actually, as I think about it, I think most of the tools don't require you to be calm first. The problem with chatter is you never get calm. You're always kind of worked up. So you need a tool that can help turn the temperature down. But another important tool that I definitely want to mention here refers to other people. So other people are often in a prime position to help us with our chatter. And the reason for that is they have distance from the situation. They can be more objective. They can help broaden our perspective in ways that are useful. But what we know from the science is that it is way more complicated than that. So talking to other people can be either an enormous benefit or a huge vulnerability when it comes to working through chatter. So here's why that is. So, and here's how you can harness other people. Many people think that when it comes to talking about chatter, the thing you want to do is find someone to vent your emotions to, just express, right? Just get it all off your chest. What we know from research on venting is that venting about how we feel, that can be really useful for strengthening the friendship bonds between two people. So Samantha, you and I we've got the book connection. We're buddies now. Something happens, an interview goes south, goes wrong way. I call you up and I just unload. You will never believe what that host did, blah, blah, blah. That question was so rude, blah, blah, blah. That's really good for making us feel close and connected. Like it feels good to know that there's someone out there who's willing to take the time to listen and empathically connect with me. But this is an important but, if all I do is vent about my emotions, I leave that conversation just as upset as when I started, sometimes even more upset, because I'm reactivating all those negative feelings and I'm keeping them alive in my head. So here's the way to have a productive conversation with someone else about your chatter. Find someone to talk to who does initially take time to listen to what you're going through. It is important to learn about the other person's experience and to let that person express their emotions to a certain degree. But at a certain point in the conversation, what you ideally want the person you're talking to do is help you broaden your perspective. So Samantha, you come to me with a problem, tell me about oh man, that's terrible. But you know what? I dealt with something similar once, and here's how I managed that. Or you've done so many of these interviews with authors, right? This couldn't have been the worst one in the world, right? And there'll be many more. You've had so many, so different ways of trying to break you out of that tunnel vision, help you broaden your perspective to bring you back on track. That is the formula for getting good chatter support on the one hand, or if someone comes to you for help, for you being a good chatter advisor to others. Listen, empathize, and then at a certain point in the conversation, help the person reframe. Now, I wish I could tell you when during a conversation you go from step 1 to step 2. I wish I could say at the 76-second mark, you stop listening and you start telling them to go broad. It is not that simple. Different people need different amounts of time talking about expressing their emotions before they are ready to go broad. And so the advice I'd like to give people is, if you're not sure when to start shifting the conversation, just ask the person you're talking to, not in a patronizing way, in a totally authentic way. You want to keep going, Samantha? Or like, no problem, I'm here as long as you want. But I do want to, I have one idea. Can I tell you about that? Something like, just play with it to start nudging them. That's the art to being a good chatter advisor to others. All right, I'm zipping it up.
No, so I think this leads into what you're talking about, where if you have someone in your family that has been fighting with chatter and you notice that, what how do you approach that with them? How do you, if you want to be there and be helpful, how do you approach that with
Yeah,
them?
I'm so glad you raised this question. So everything I just told you about pertains to situations in which a person actively seeks out help from someone else. And there are lots of instances like this. Like as soon as I smell a little chatter brewing in a metaphorical sense, I instantly, pick up the phone and call my 3 chatter advisors, my 3 friends who I know are really good at not just getting me to vent, but also they help me work through problems. Um, but there are going to be lots of instances in your lives where you see someone struggling and they don't ask you for help. And then the question is, what do you do, as you just asked me? And the first thing I would suggest is be very cautious in how you approach that situation. Because one of the things we know about people is we have a strong desire to maintain this sense of agency and this idea of autonomy, the idea that, hey, we're capable of taking care of ourselves. It's an incredibly strong drive. And when you offer help to someone, if they haven't asked for it, what that does is it communicates to them, hey, you don't think that they're capable of managing the situation on their own. So that can create a defensive reaction as a result. This happens all the time between parents and kids, and I will say even among experts and their children. So I will routinely see one of my daughters struggling with something, chatter about schoolwork or about boys, and I'll go over, hey, sweetie, can I offer you some advice about this? Like, I've been through this kind of thing before, and immediately that innocent overture is met first with a facial expression that we have labeled with a scientific label in my home called death eyes, which look like this, followed by
I'm
you're familiar
familiar.
with that one. Okay. Most parents, I'm guessing, likely are use the chat function to tell us if you've experienced your kids. Then my wife gets called into, I think, Mom, he's doing it again. And then I'm toast. I come back to this office here. It's like my own little cave, and that's it. So that if you volunteer the support when someone doesn't ask for it, it can blow up in your face. Here's the good news. That doesn't mean that you can't help people. Instead, what we've learned is that there are ways of helping people with their chatter invisibly. We call it invisible support. And what that involves is doing things to help other people, but without drawing attention to the fact that you're helping them. And it can take many forms. Some of them are extremely mundane, others more complicated. If I see my wife is struggling with chatter, lots of stuff going on, kids stuff, work stuff, home stuff, I can do things to just ease her burden. So to go back to Samantha, what you were talking about before, like the mental space, I can take care of dinner, pick up the dry cleaning, take the kids and do an activity with them, right? I'm doing things, taking things off her plate, giving her some more space to deal with the issues that she's grappling with. It's one thing you can do. And importantly, if you do that, you don't want to, at the end of the day, like give your partner like a little itemization, like, hey, I did.
Maybe don't call it out. Yeah, just
I don't call. This is not the time for getting points for what you do, right? The whole idea here is I'm doing stuff without her knowing it to make her life easier. If it's something happening with your team, there are ways of helping people on your team, your colleagues, without them knowing it. Let's say one of my students in the lab is really struggling with their writing skills. Maybe I'll have a lab meeting in which we talk collectively about the different things that we do to strengthen our writing. Or maybe I'll circulate some, hey, everyone, I just read these books. They're great. Let's talk about them the next time we meet. Or here's a talk at Nicola's about, blah, blah, blah. Let's go look there. So what I'm doing there is I'm getting the information to the team, but without drawing attention to the fact that it's one person who really needs it. There's one other, and I'll say this very quickly, there's one other invisible support tool that I'm very fond of. that you have to, and that is very powerful, but you have to be a little careful about how you use it. And it is called affectionate touch. And so I'm giving the caveats here because obviously you don't want to go touching people at work affectionately, haphazardly. Not good. On the record, Kross is not endorsing that. But what would you agree, Samantha?
I was literally just going to say, Ethan doesn't endorse that.
Okay.
Let it be known. So go ahead.
I'm on the record, not endorsing that.
We got that.
But it would be a tragedy to not talk about this and communicate the power of affectionate touch to folks who are interested in learning about these invisible tools. Touch is one of the most basic and primitive tools we have for regulating emotions. If you think about kids, when they're born into this world, what happens? The child is delivered. It's crying and screaming, and it is put on its mother's chest, skin to skin contact, skin to skin, affectionate touch. We keep on soothing our children throughout their lives, not just when they're kids, but older too. We hug them, we cuddle them, we tickle them, we do all of these things to communicate that warmth and emotion. And with adults, there's lately for COVID, it's this, I do this, with the fist bump. Maybe sometimes the elbow.
I've been getting a lot of elbows lately.
Elbows are good too. They can hurt sometimes if you get it right on the button. But that touch and connection, a pat on the back, a hug. What happens biologically and psychologically with affectionate touch is this. There are receptors on our skin that code for affectionate touch. And when it is registered, that automatically releases a cascade of stress-fighting chemicals in your body that help you fight chatter, help improve your mood. At the conscious level, affectionate touch also does something else. It reminds us that, hey, there's someone here in the world who actually cares about us, and that makes us feel good too. So that's another invisible way of supporting. And I do this with my kid. I'll see them doing their homework and that's usually the facial expression, and I'll go over and I'll like, how's it going, sweetie? What's going on? So that's another tool for the people toolbox, that second category of tools I've been talking about.
Awesome. Well, Ethan, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I want to encourage everyone to go check out Ethan's website. There is a little quiz on there you can take to see how aware you are of chatter and the tools. Make sure you also go to Nicola's and check out the signed copies. Get a copy for you and a friend if you haven't already done so. Ethan, how can people find you?
You can go to my website, www.ethankross with a Kross.com, and information about me, links to the lab, links to the book, free resources that you can download about chatter and everything we've talked about, and lots more.
Awesome. Is there anything in the hopper for you? Any other books coming out anytime soon?
Not just yet. Doing a lot of talking about this, which is fun, and back in the lab doing a lot of research that has come up while talking about it, which is really exciting. So we'll see about future books.
Very cool. Well, we will hopefully see you back maybe in person at that point.
That would be great.
You never know. So yes, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Ethan. I'll clap for you because you can't hear everybody else clapping. Have a great night, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.